Okay, so in assignment 5, we are really digging in pretty heavy to managing users, managing roles, managing permissions, getting into creating, profiles for users um, that kind of restrict some of the resources that a user are allowed to consume during any given session. And then, we worked into this idea of creating tables and granting various permissions to those tables about which roles can do which things to those tables. So I really wanted to kind of walk through the assignment and kind of show you guys how to do it before you kind of strike off and do it on your own. So if I also want to get you kind of used to um, this idea of the difference between a schema and a user, and understanding that there's there's not really all that big a difference. There isn't really any difference between them. They're kind of synonymous in a way, but they can be used in a way to be a sort of a storage container for stuff, or they can also be used as a way to grant access to the database and to other users as well. So I want to make sure that we kind of get this idea kind of straight in our head, because it comes up a lot when you're trying to manage the database. So so the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of, you can see here that I'm creating a user here, and we created a new table space as a part of our last assignment, and we can assign users to use that table space. And so what I'm doing right here is saying, hey, I'd like to create a new user, and I've already gone through and done this one. So we'll just go ahead and sort of increment all this stuff to show you guys how this is done. So what I want to do is I want to create a new user or schema whose really only purpose in life is to store objects that other users can access. So if I'm going to create a user, really about all I'm required to do when I do this is say, hey, create this user, give this user a password, which we use the identified clause to do. I can tell it what its default table space is and its temporary table space, and that's pretty much everything I need at that point. So if I go ahead and create this user, you can see right away down here in SQL Developer, it's gone ahead and told me that, hey, I successfully created this user for you. But one of the things that we would notice if we tried to log in with this user, and I can actually go ahead and try that right here. If we tried to log into this user right away by saying, giving it the credentials that we had set out here, we'd notice pretty quickly that we weren't able to do it. So if I go ahead and test this, it tells me right away that, hey, you're not allowed to create a session on the database, and so you can't log into the database to create stuff. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I couldn't use this user to create stuff. So if we just look down here where I have some create table statements, I could actually go in and create a table still in this schema. So if I say, hey, create a table in my data2 and just call it table A, I can actually run this statement. And you can see that I've actually successfully created that table. So although the user is not able to log into the database, we're still able to create objects in that schema using users such as sys that have this ability to create users, right? So one of the, or I'm sorry, using a user that has the ability to create a table in any schema. So where this comes in handy is you may not want to have all the individual users who log into your database creating tables all over the place, but you still may want to, and you often will want to, um, create um, give users the ability to create these tables in a centralized place, but you don't want to have everybody just use one super user password to that particular place. So if you look here, you know, I could, in theory, give all of the users I created in the database the create any table permission, at which point they'd be able to create tables in any place that they wanted to. And that's obviously not a very optimal scenario because of the obvious implications of all users being able to create objects for all users. The other thing that I could do is I could say, well, okay, let's go ahead and just give everybody the my data to user and the my data to password. Well, this creates a whole other problem with your database management, because you need, you're creating a scenario in this case where you don't have the capacity to lock users out of the database who perhaps you don't want in there anymore, but have this password. So essentially, at this point, anybody who has the connection parameters for the database and has the username and password for the for this my data user could log into the database. So then if we were to fire somebody, or we were to decide that you know, that they shouldn't have the permissions to do this type of stuff anymore, we would essentially have to go through and change the password for this my data 2 user, and then we'd have to redistribute that password to all the users who are using it, and you can imagine what kind of a mess that kind of creates. And the flip side to that is just sort of counting on the idea that people won't be able to get to the database because you somehow denied them network access to a place where they could connect to the database. But that's also a really hard thing to manage, right? So there's a way to deal with this, and it's pretty handy. So if I come out here and I create this a new user to go along with my schema where I want to store all these tables, I can come out here and say, hey, go ahead and create this user ID, which is an ID that I intend to be used by someone to connect to the database. So I'll go ahead and connect here or execute this statement here, and I will have created my my new user here, right? But this user has the same problem that the my data 2 user had, or in that it doesn't have the permissions to connect and do the type of things that we want to do. So we talked last week about this idea of, you know, managing individuals, users, permissions becomes really difficult over time, especially as the number of users grow. And so the way that we accommodate dealing with multiple users who may all kind of need the same permissions is to create what's called roles on the database. So if we take a look here, I have this role that I'm going to create, and I can create this role, assign permissions to it, and then if I would like to remove the permissions that are associated, all the various permissions that are associated with this role, from a particular user, then I just have to take that role away from the user. Additionally, if I wanted to add a permission to all of the various users who might be using this schema role, then I can just go out and alter the role, and by default all of those permissions will cascade down to the users that need them. So I'm going to go ahead here and just go ahead and create this role. And I've created this role, data2 schema role. And the first thing about this is just creating the role in and of itself doesn't necessarily do anything, right? The role doesn't have any permissions associated with it. So it's very much exactly like a user in the respect of you know, creating it doesn't necessarily give it any permissions to do anything, and you have to grant those permissions to the role. So here, you can see that I am going to grant several permissions to this schema role. One is connect. So this gives this role the ability to connect to the database and create a session so that they can log in and do stuff. And then I have this resource permission, which is actually another kind of default role that comes with the database, which grants people or roles who have been granted this particular role the ability to create tables and sequences and procedures and all the type of stuff that might be associated with kind of a development role on the database. And then lastly, I'm going to do this create view permission and grant that to this role, because that's kind of the last thing on the list I would typically want a developer to be able to do inside of the database. So I'm going to go ahead and just execute all three of these by highlighting all of them and hitting this script button, and you can see that it's granted the connect resource and create view to this role. And actually, you can see here I granted it to my data schema role, which I had already done in the past. So re-granting the same permission to a role multiple times won't hurt anything and won't confuse the database at all. What I really want to do is grant these all to this this new data2 schema role I've created. You can see that I have successfully completed all of these grants, and now instead of having to grant each one of these permissions individually to the users I'm creating, I can go ahead and just grant the role to those users. So now I'm just going to go ahead and say, hey, let's grant this data schema role to my data2 user I created and my data2 user I created, not to confuse the issue. And now if I execute this, and we can see it's upset because I put the 2 in the wrong place here on my role. So the database is just telling me, hey, you're trying to assign a role to these users that doesn't exist. And so if I correct that, I can make this grant, and then you'll see, hey, if you actually specify a role that exists, the grants will succeed. And now the users that I've created will actually have the permissions that we're seeking. So if we come back here and look at the properties now for this user that we wanted to create, we'll see now that this my data2 user can now connect successfully to the database. So that's a great thing, right? Our users can connect. That's what we need them to do. They've been granted certain permissions, but the one thing that we really haven't contended with here is this idea of potentially not wanting to grant the user or share the username and password of this my data2 schema user with everybody else who might need to use this particular space to store tables. So I'm going to go ahead and save that connection. We'll see kind of what to do next here. So This takes us to what is a very, very interesting command. It's actually possible to grant another user the ability to connect as a different user without them needing to know the password that user is that user actually has, right? So in this scenario here, where we're trying to alter our user, and we just created this my data 2 user, and what we want to do is give the my data 2 user, this user here, and I apologize if those names are confusing, but hopefully you can see here on the screen that I'm talking about two distinct users here. We can actually grant, we can alter this user by granting this other user the ability to connect as that user, without that user ever having to actually have to know the password here. So if we take a look up here, we'll see that we've created this user, this my data 2, and we've given it a password of my data 2. Then we created this other user, this my data 2 user, and we've given him or her a password of my data 2 user. Now, if I come down here and make this grant or alter this user, you can see that we're successful. And now the idea is that we would be able to connect as the my data to the spot that we want all these folks to be able to create objects and create users. But what we don't want to do is have them all know what the password is to this particular user. So this grants us this means of giving folks a common place to work and store tables, which is a very common scenario, especially dealing with applications, but being able to essentially lock folks out of that area by merely removing permissions from them that wouldn't allow them to get in there anymore, without sort of putting our system at risk, right? So if we share a username password across 10, 15, 30 users over a period of time, we're really making our database insecure, because we've got all of these various users who may have shared this password, and heck, they may have shared that password with other users, and so we could have an unknown number of people in the world who know the password to an area on our database that has objects that presumably contain important application data. So by using this grant connect permission, we can actually make it possible so this user can connect without using this other user's password. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the properties here, and first we'll just kind of prove that this second user can connect to the database, right? And so we will go ahead and do that. And we'll test this. We'll see, okay, yep, this user can successfully connect to the database. I'll go ahead and say connect. And now that user will connect to the database, and we see we're all connected up. So the next thing I'll do is actually kind of prove that we are who we think we are here by just creating a SQL worksheet. So I think if I do select user from dual, it should tell me who I am. So it says, hey, you, Mr. My Data 2 user, are Mr. My Data 2 user, which is who we would expect to be, because that's who we connected as. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back into this connection. I'm going to select the properties, and this time I'm going to change our connection property by putting a square bracket in, and I'm going to type my data 2 and then close that square bracket. And so at this point, what we're really telling the database is, hey, I'm logging in with my credentials, but I would like to connect as this other user so that I can essentially inherit that user's ability to create tables and objects in that user's schema. And by the way, any other permissions that we might grant to this user. So when we log in using this connect through functionality, we essentially at that point are acting as that user. So any type of permissions that you might want to grant in this fashion, you can, but the advantage to this approach is this my data 2 user never actually knows the password for this user. So if we simply remove the ability for this user to connect as this user, then we've effectively removed all of those permissions as well, and kept our database secure. So now we will test this connection to make sure that everything's going good, and it says that we're successful. And now I'm going to go ahead and just connect one more time here. So what we should see over here in our SQL worksheet that we have is that we are actually connected as the other user again. So I'm using the my data 2 underscore user, and now when we run this select user from dual statement, you can see that I'm actually in the database as this other user. And so now if I were to come and create a table, I would actually create that table as this my data 2 user. So if we look over here in this my data 2 connection, we can see the table A that we created when we created this user to kind of prove that we could. But if we come back over here and we grab this my table B create statement we have, and I jump back over here, and I'm going to remove the schema qualification from this so that when we create this table, we will be creating it as the user that we are. So I say, hey, create table B, and now if I come over to this user and refresh this, we'll see that we're actually creating tables in this for this user or schema called my data 2, but we logged in using the credentials of our my data 2 user, and now have kind of proven out this functionality. And now if I want to remove this particular user's ability to do this anymore, I just rescind the permission, and my database and all the objects that are created in this schema are not at risk, because the my data 2 user doesn't actually know what the password is to log into this particular area of the database. So this is a really kind of common scenario in the Oracle database, and for whatever reason they made a decision long ago to implement this ability this way. So when I'm granting users the ability to create tables and other objects, I can't say, hey, create table, which applies only to your schema, and then also, I guess you can create tables for user B, and oh, I guess you can create tables for user C. We just use this connect through functionality to implement that sort of exact same approach. So I wanted to make you guys aware of this because it's a very common database management problem. I'm not going to require you to do it as a part of the assignment, but I want you to know about it and know how to use it. So if should you ever need that type of functionality, you're aware that it's possible and you've actually seen how it's done. So The next piece I wanted to talk about was this idea of creating a profile, right? So if we were to go out and look for the different profiles that exist in the database, we'd find that there's a default profile that gets assigned to a new user, and kind of unless we tell the database differently. And you can see the type of things that are associated with a profile by just kind of looking at this create statement here. So you can see that we can actually throttle the amount of processor resources that a user can consume during a session. We can throttle the amount of processor, database processor, CPU resources that a user is using for any particular statement. We can limit the amount of time that they're allowed to connect to the database. We can limit the amount of time that their session can sit idle. So right now I'm saying basically, hey, leave a database session alive forever unless the user actually physically disconnects. In practice, you're probably going to want to actually set this up to log sessions off of the database if they're idle for some particular amount of time. You can also limit the number of sessions a user is allowed to create. So, perhaps you don't want one user given the ability to create 1,000 sessions and thereby maybe take advantage of the per session or sort of circumvent the per session limit that you've put upon them. And then you can also limit other things related to essentially the amount of I/O that the database is going to be doing for any particular session or command that a user is currently using, right? So then, going down this list, we can also see that there's this idea of limiting the memory that any particular user session can consume. And then there's also this idea of a composite limit, which I'm going to have you guys kind of research for your own in the assignment by having to read the documentation. And then you can also see stuff around password management and all these type of things. And this just gives us this ability to kind of set a policy for the users that we create on a database that limits their ability to or maybe grants them the ability to consume the database resources. So especially if you've got a production system which is maybe being accessed by tons of different applications, you might want to limit the abuse that any one application can render upon your database, because otherwise if every user and every application that connects to your database is able to consume unlimited resources, you can see pretty quickly how you might get into a situation where certain problem users or users that have a tendency to consume a lot of resources are essentially locking other users out of using the database by consuming all the available resources. So, profiles are a great way to kind of address that particular issue, and it's a very powerful function that you can use on the database to ensure that your database is performant for all users and not just maybe the one user who might want to connect to it. So moving down through here, then you can see here. Okay, now we're creating tables, and I can obviously have this capacity to create various tables on the database. So if we go through here, we've already created this table A and table B, and because I'm logged in as the sys user here, I can also go ahead and create this table C in this MyData2 schema. And if we look over here now at this point, do a refresh, we'll see all three of those tables are in there. Now, one of the things we do in the assignment is we really get into this idea of, hey, there's a number of different permissions that we want to grant various users to do on these tables, and they're kind of all different. So, what's that? Nope. Here we can see, I've created 6 different roles that are really kind of, I tried to name in such a way as to give you an idea of what the roles were for. So, one role I created allows, all permissions on table A. This other role is really just seeking to grant all permissions, but being able to update on table B. Another one which grants update and select on table B. One that only grants select permissions to table C. One that grants all permissions but the permission to delete on table C. And then finally a role that grants the permission to just do the delete operation on table C. So if I go down through here and kind of change these role names, because I know I've implemented them once already, you can see that once again I can create these roles, and all we've done is sort of created a container for permissions at that point. Go ahead and execute all of this, and you can see I clicked that twice. So if we look up here, we'll see that all of these roles were actually created. And so I've created those roles, and then the second thing I want to do is go down through and actually grant permissions on these various tables that we've created in this My Data 2, and grant those to the roles that we've created here. So I'm going to go down through, and I'm just specifying that we're going to grant these permissions on these new tables in this new schema that we've just created. And then I've also created these new roles that we want to assign those permissions to. So I'm just going to go down through here and append this number 2 to my roles. And so here I'm granting the various permissions on the various objects to the various roles that we've created. So go ahead and execute that. And you can see that all of those grants were successful as well. So one of the last parts we get after in assignment 5 is this idea of creating these new users. So you can see here that I can drop a user, and so by saying cascade, I'm essentially saying, hey, drop this user and all the objects this user owns. And then if I wanted to create this new user named Billy, and I wanted to make sure that he had the profile, all users that we had created, and had his default table space set to the new user table space we created, and then our temporary table space to temp, then this is the structure of the command that I would use to do that. So you can see here, if I actually execute this command, that we have successfully recreated our user named Billy. And then in order for Billy to actually be able to create any type of objects on the database, he actually also needs to have been granted permissions or a quota on a particular table space. So here you can see, although I have set his default table space to be new users, I'm going to actually come down here and grant him a quota on the My Users table space, which essentially means that this user is able to actually consume space on the database and thereby create objects. So we can grant a user the permissions to create tables, but if they're not also granted a quota on a table space, they won't actually be able to create any of those objects because they're not allowed to consume any space on the database. So you can see here, I can just then alter my user to grant him that ability to use these type of things, and then and now he's in a position where he could actually go out and create objects on the database. And you can see here that we have limited him to consuming 3 megabytes. So this user could go out and create a new table, and you could fill it with lots of data, but as soon as he got up to 3 megabytes of data, then that would be it for him. And we would either have to grant him greater space, or he would have to stop adding information to the database. And so the rest of the assignment kind of goes through the idea of creating the rest of these users, and I don't see any reason for us to do that over and over. And then, you know, you can see that we also go down through and grant these users the ability to connect to the database, grant the user the role that contains the permission that we want them to have, and then that really gets you all the way through what you need to do in order to complete the assignment. Then the last piece of the assignment really focuses on kind of proving that you're able to do all of this stuff. So I've provided these SQL statements for you to execute when you've completed the assignment. And if we take a look at what happens when we execute these, you'll see here that it essentially just shows me my host name, you know, proving that I did the work, and the other things there are kind of also proving that I did the work here in this SQL statement. So really, if you're able to do the type of stuff I've just gone over here, then you're all set to complete assignment 5. Now, the other hint I would give you is, in case, you know, you're like, oh my gosh, he went by too fast. How do I figure out how to do this or that or the other thing? Know that in your DBA panel, you can come down here and you can always get SQL Developer to kind of help you out, right? So if you wanted to create a brand new profile, you could come down here and say create new, and looky there, there's a panel helping you to create a brand new profile, and it actually writes out the SQL for you. And you'll find this functionality for pretty much any operation that you want to create on the database or perform on the database. So if you're not quite sure how to write a command, you know, let SQL Developer help you out, and generally you can just copy paste this stuff out of here and then alter it for your own purposes. So one, handy way to learn, and two, also a real handy way to be lazy sometimes. If you don't want to have to type this whole thing out, but you know you need a statement that looks like this, well, just go there and right click and create it, and copy paste this out, and then just alter it for your own purposes. And that could be a pretty good time saver for you as well. So that really covers the bulk of what I wanted to kind of show you guys this week. Next week, I really want to dive into the concept of undo and start looking at the chapters that kind of come after this user management. But I wanted to make sure that everybody was in a solid position to be able to complete assignment 5, because I know that I just kind of showed you the basics last week, and I wanted to make sure that we dug a little deeper into it this week, and made sure that I kind of set you guys up for success on this assignment. So with that, I guess I would say, are there any questions for anybody who's on the line here about, creating users, profiles, roles, any of the stuff I've shown you here related to assignment 5?
Yeah, can you just go over the difference between, if there is any, the difference between user and schema? Because you
Yeah,
started talking user and schema.
yeah, it's kind of a confusing, because in essence, we use the term interchangeably, right?
Okay.
So and that's kind of, I don't know, maybe unfortunate at times. But if you take a look here, in essence, there isn't any difference between a user and a schema. What a user, um, the only difference between what we call a schema and what we typically think of as a user is the permissions that we grant, right? So with a schema, we might say, or for a user that we only wanted to use in what's kind of thought of as a schema, only as a place to store database objects. What we would typically wouldn't do is give anybody access to that particular place that allowed them to connect as that user. So let me see if I can maybe clear it up here a little bit with this my data 2 I have up here, and this my data 2 user. So if I name this the my data 2 schema, and I name this the my data 2 schema user, I haven't really changed anything except the way that I'm referring to them. So, and then another thing that you can do, if you come over here and we were to take a look at our sys users' ability to browse schemas. If I come over here and I look at this schema browser and I hit this drop down, what we're going to find out is, hey, there's this my data thing that Arthur's calling a schema, and there's this my data 2 thing that Arthur's calling a schema, and then there's this my data 2 user and my data user, and all these things that I've kind of alternately been describing as both a schema and a user. At the end of the day, you can kind of think about it as, typically we're referring to the objects that have been created on the database and are owned by a particular user when we're referring to a schema. And then when we're referring to a user, we're kind of talking about an identity that allows us to connect and to do certain things on the database. But in essence, they're the same thing. Okay, so I've probably confused the issue more than I've clarified it, but does that make it any clearer?
Yeah, yeah, okay. Um, can you scroll down a little bit? I saw you where you talk about Alter, Joe, and then you say, I don't know, 3. Okay,
Sure.
there it is. Alter user, Billy, quota 3. Is that the way you assign, what do you call the, the table space?
Yeah, so if we come over here and we take a look here, here's my sys connection, right, for my PDB1 pluggable database. If we scroll down here and we look for this user, who we named Billy, so I guess I don't need to scroll that far. And let me just go ahead and refresh this panel to make sure he's in here. If we take a look at our user Billy right here, and we came in here and we edited him, and we took a look at the quotas, what we see is, hey, Billy has been granted you know, 3,072 kilobytes, which is really just 3 megabytes, right? But I've referenced it in such a way as to just use, because I used the M, the unit that the database used was megabytes in assigning that space, but here it just kind of defaults to kilobytes. But you can see, yeah, we've granted him the ability to use space on this table space. So I can grant all the permissions in the world to a user from the ability to create objects, but if they don't actually have a quota assigned to them that allows them to utilize space on the database, they won't actually be able to create any objects. And I can demonstrate this here, because you can see that we've got this user, or we created our Billy user, and we made his default table space new users, but he doesn't actually have a quota on it, right? So if what I've just said is true, we ought to be able to connect to the database as Billy and find out if we try to create an object on his default table space that we won't be able to. So let's just go ahead and try that. So I'm going to come up here. We will alter this connection and give the application a second to think about it. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and put Billy in here. We're going to have Billy connect as himself. We have cryptically given him the password of Billy. We'll test the connection. Sorry, my looks like my thing is running a little bit slow here, so we'll just give it a sec to catch up. We could see, hey, you know, Billy doesn't actually have the permission to connect or create a session. So we'll just, we'll save that quick. We'll come down here. Come on, application, catch up. All right. We'll come down here. We will grant Billy the permissions to connect and create a session on the database. So go ahead and grant that to him. He should be able to connect. And then we'll also go ahead and grant this role, or we can actually grant the resource role to Billy as well, if we wanted to. And we know that contains the ability to create a table. So I'm going to go ahead and grant that to Billy, and you can see there's no problem with sort of iteratively granting the same permission to Billy. The database will sort that out for you. So at this point, you know, Billy ought to be able to connect. So now if I click connect, we'll see that he can. We know his default table space is a table space on which he does not actually possess the permissions to utilize any space. So if we came back over here, we grabbed a create table command, and we came back over to our Billy user. I'm gonna say create table. You see here I have this my data to schema qualifier. I'm just going to take that off of there. So I'm saying let's create this table B with our user Billy. By default, that should use the new user table space that we set as his default. And because our table statement doesn't say otherwise, that's what the database will do. Now if I click create table, it should not have allowed Billy to actually create one on this space. So probably what I did with Billy was actually give him a permission I didn't mean to in the midst of this. Let's go take a look at what we actually did here. So Oh, really what's happened here, I actually know what happened without even in thinking about it. When we created this table, because we didn't issue a command to create any extents or essentially consume any space on the database, we've actually not kind of violated our directive yet that doesn't allow us to do that. So now I think I can prove the thing I was trying to prove by doing a simple insert statement. So if I say insert into table B, and I say we're going to put something into column 1, and I would like the value that we put into column 1 to be, say, the number 1. If I've done everything correctly, what the database should do at this point is actually yell at me that I don't have the permission to do that. So let's see what happens when I do that. So right here you can see, hey, Arthur or Billy in this case, right? You don't have any privileges on this table space, which means I don't have any quota, the ability to consume any space. So when you try to insert the value into this table, which forces the database to try to allocate an extent, which we learned about a couple weeks ago, I'm going to stop you right there, because you're not allowed to do that. And if you want to do that, then have the person that's in charge of the database grant you some resources on this particular table space. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and just close that there. So, does that answer your question? Do you have any other questions about that?
No, it's okay.
Okay, all right. So, in that case, if there aren't any other questions about how to do assignment 5, I'm going to wrap up the lecture for this week, and I will stop the recording. But then if anybody has questions about anything else, we can go ahead and talk about that here when I'm all done. So next week, make sure or know that we're going to be really diving into the stuff that's covered in chapter 9 and chapter 10, and then there'll also be 3 more assignments coming to you guys to complete the course, and those will come probably pretty fast and furious here, because we've only got really about the month of November to get through in order to wrap all this stuff up, and we're almost at the end of October. So make sure you come back and check out next week's lecture, and keep an eye out on Blackboard for the remaining assignments that we're going to have to complete.